what are your most proud moments when you look back on your careers with the MPSCS?
Well, we've talked about the build out of the system a little bit, but I guess I'd like to talk about the support of it a minute. And you had a pretty big role in the enterprise asset management system that we implemented, and it was called MP2, and MSP maintenance had this software on the shelf, and they hadn't implemented it yet. They bought it last year, they hadn't implemented it, and I knew that this system, the towers of the old MSP system was tracked in a notebook. And I'm going, this isn't going to work. And of course, computers is getting a little more popular. And here's this enterprise. And I didn't even know it was enterprise at the time. I found out that, can we use it? And maintenance can still use it. Found out it was an enterprise solution. And you and I implemented that. And, I think to start with, there was approximately 80 pieces of equipment at each shelter that we put in there that we could track by serial number, model number, had parts in there so you could tell whether you had a part to fix it. You had preventive maintenance that kicked out work orders, repair work orders. It made a system the size of the MPSCS manageable from a software people perspective. And then with that said, after a couple of years, we started the FRC, and that helped the radio techs, field resource center, do work orders, close them out, check that when they were done testing or working on it, that there was no alarms and it was working properly. Took a lot of heat off our network communications centers that were very technical, dealing with situations that they didn't need the staff that was just doing cookie cutter stuff interfering with their time. So I think implementing the FRC and then the asset management system was very pivotal in maintaining the system as it's grown. It wouldn't have been able to be done any other way in my book. I think the other thing earlier on was when we knew we were going to self-maintain, and in the old days, MSP had the 2 tower guys, and they had a generator guy, and they had a carpenter and an HVAC guy. They were separate units. They're all maintenance, but they were separate, doing their own thing. And, with this many towers and having to drive an hour to get to a tower, it made sense to have our site maintenance be able to do the tower work, the generator work, the HVAC work, the maintenance of the shelter itself, the grounds. And so when we brought these people on, when we were building out a phase, they were at training. They went to generator training, HVAC training, tower light, the strobe lighting systems that were on the tower. They learned how to maintain all that equipment. So it wasn't that they were driving all the way out to a tower to fix a tower light and not being able to do the preventive maintenance on the HVAC or the generator. And we organized it so, during the winter, we could do generator maintenance, because we did make a decision to put our generators inside the shelter. And that way, when it's snowing and everything, they're inside doing preventive maintenance. And in the spring, they didn't have to worry about the generator. They did HVAC maintenance. And during the summer, they did tower maintenance. And it really was a success from a preparation and then the opportunity to implement those ideas. And I look back going, that I'm going to take a lot of credit. I won't take it all, but I'll take a lot of credit for coming up, creating this thought, this way of maintaining the system. I look back, I'm pretty proud of that.
Well, as you should be, because many of those processes that you developed in multiple roles that you've had with the MPSCS are still utilized today. And even around, the technology adoption, go back to, with MP2, we spent a lot of time on that. I don't think a lot of people really understood to go from zero to a system when initially we were told, don't spend a lot of time on it. Maybe see what you can get done in 30 days. And I think we spent an entire year on that to make sure it was right and got the information. But it was the second part of that where you started looking at technology capabilities and utilized the team of the tower crew to create additional efficiency, just as you had just identified with, when we do the generators, when we do the HVAC and that. But it was the adoption of the HP Jornadas that were out there for a period of time.
Yeah, the clamshells.
The clamshells, yeah. We still have one of those in our museum.
That makes me feel old.
But it was what you saw as a capability is if you could have the team download their work orders and then take all of that to the site, because at that time, MP2 was a client-server-based application. You couldn't take anything with you.
Yeah.
And there was no cell access at these sites. So you saw this as a means of efficiency and said, hey, the tower crew is going to start this first. And they loved it. And I know you had a lot of conversations with a company that owned MP2 at the time, DataStream, around the capabilities. They continue to evolve that. And then unfortunately, the technology just disappeared. HP no longer made those devices, and we were back at zero. But it was everything that you focused on from an efficiency standpoint. Hearing the team when those things went away, to say they were frustrated and upset was an understatement. They wanted another solution. Unfortunately, another solution just didn't exist. But it's that same approach that you had so many years ago as what we're looking at, in a future approach. How can we gain efficiency of, personnel being able to update ticket information, get information, the process, even the processes you developed on what to do in a generator preventative maintenance and at what point in the year to do that. All the information that you documented that then connected to the work orders, so then the individual doing it, whether they were a senior individual or just new at the job, here was the way that you do it.
Preventive maintenance steps laid out,
Yep.
History of, that thermostat was replaced last year. And I mean, it is good information for the technician to be efficient and successful.
And I remember one of those that you used that data to actually identify a manufacturer defect. And it was on the block heaters.
No.
I think we had a bad batch that came in, and you guys identified when all these block heaters were purchased and then contact manufacturer. And I believe it was outside of warranty, I think, when this happened. But contact the manufacturer, and the manufacturer replaced all of those. But it was utilizing those tools, that approach that you put in place, that not only identified a solution for us, but clearly identified something in the private sector as a need for that. I think the same was true with your involvement on the microwave equipment where there were some oscillator issues. And that same approach that was used in the block heater issues was used again with the oscillators to identify that it was a bad batch of oscillators that needed replaced. So, again, as you look back in your career, I have the opportunity to look back and recall many other pieces that you had a strong hand in protecting public safety.
Well, you got to be looking at technology. You got to be moving ahead. And I'll shout out to Todd Velderman. He got into the hobby of 3D printing, And then our microwave equipment had these filters on them, and to replace the filter is like $120, and you had to buy the whole metal structure and everything. It's like, that's ridiculous. Todd, can we print this? And he goes, well, let me go home and print it. He had a small printer and printed it in 2 pieces. And I'm going, this is going to work. And he goes, yeah, this is going to work. So we bought a 3D printer, and we printed enough of these plastic mounts to hold the filter material that you could unclip, change out the filter material, and clip it, saving the state a huge amount of money. That was pretty cool. I think before I retired, we needed to change out our tower lights. Didn't have to. They were a strobe system, but you had to replace the strobe bulb every 3 years, the white one, the red one every 6 years, because they wore out. They got dim. They didn't meet aviation standards. Well, LED technology come along, and these strobe companies, tower lighting companies, were making strobes. And so I started investigating that, and I'm going, wow, they use a lot less power, and they got like at least a 10-year lifespan. I'm going, why aren't we going to change out our lights and save money? Because, I mean, the strobe tubes were expensive. Plus, you had a tower guy going up and doing it. And then we thought about, well, let's look at putting, IR into the strobe, so when the aviation's wearing their nighttime goggles, they'll be able to see the strobe lights. I didn't know this. With nighttime goggles, they couldn't see the strobe lights. They were invisible to them. So we talked to the manufacturers, and I think we are one of the impetus of getting IRs into LED strobe lights on towers now, so the pilots wearing these goggles can see them. And that was a fight. I was frustrated fighting with the budget office, because it was a little bit of money, but it had a 5-year payback. I mean, 5 years, then we're golden. And still had to wrestle with them why this was a good idea. But finally convinced them, did a couple spreadsheets, showed them, finally got it done.
Yeah, and I know you're not giving yourself enough credit on that, because you were the one that had the idea on the LED side lights, and they didn't exist. So you did your research, found a company that was willing to partner. I believe it was a Canadian company that was willing to partner in this, and they built Gen 1 of that, which was the LED, and then you reached out to MSP Aviation and learned that piece on the IR piece. But it wasn't just a change on the MPSCS, but you changed the entire industry there, because an idea you had created an opportunity. And, that was one that no doubt gets missed. We talk about, the LED side lights and what it did, but you had a vision for not only efficiency, but also cost savings that made sense, and it changed the entire industry. The other part to share, as you may not recall, is those filter covers that you and Todd worked on. We actually shared that template out to other states, and what our cost avoidance of that was annually was somewhere around $200,000. So that was something we didn't anticipate as a cost. And then subsequently, when we did see what the cost was, we didn't add the kind of money. But we shared that template out to other states, so other states were taking advantage of it. So again, there's a number of things in your career that I've had the opportunity to make sure I don't forget, and I can remind you of the things you've been able to do on the system. And Bob, will take a minute for you. You're still working with this, but if you're looking back on it, what would you say some of the successful things in your career with the MPSCS?
Well, first off, I'll do a little commentary on what Theron just said, and I'll just say it, that data matters. And that's what Theron put in place, ways to track information, which is data, which gives you information to make great decisions. Which, I think we did a good job of that when we started this. It was all spreadsheets and everything else, but we were constantly evolving those spreadsheets to track all this data from the time we walked on the site to the time we were done with the site. And I think, it's kind of a profound question you bring up there, but, the question isn't who's going to let me, but rather who's going to stop me. That was a mantra that I've had for 31 years since I joined this system, and listening to Steffel and figuring out how to do those things. I'm going at 31 years at Motorola now, and, this is without a shadow of a doubt my magnum opus. It's been phenomenal. It's just when I step back and see what we took from this and did all over the country from my perspective at Motorola, what Theron was growing this system, doing these things, and putting this system in a place to be very, very successful for years to come, setting the foundation for the 137 employees here at MPSCS and the continued growth. I was doing the same thing, but I was doing it at a different level of setting up all these other places with what we learned and what we did here. So I think, looking back at that and then having the opportunity to come back here and be part of the 30 years has been full circle for me. It's been so satisfying to see what we started and where we're at, and we're going to set this system up for the next 30 years. That's been so satisfying for me. And I did a couple speeches for project management professional organizations, and there's not a lot of project managers or anybody else that actually starts a project and finishes and closes a project. It's very few. They just continue to move on, and they leave the close out and stuff for others. But I got to do that here on a smaller scale, and then on a grander scale, I get to come back and watch this thing for 30 years, the growth it's had, and then hopefully set it up for the next 30 years. So I think, in a nutshell, that's what I'd say. But I want to go back. You talked about 9/11, and what it meant. I think some other events probably helped shape it just as much for me, and most recently the ice storm. And when we had the ice storm, and we were able to meet and talk with some very high-level officials and talk about what we actually did 30 years ago to set this up. Little did we know that radial ice would actually be radial ice. We were trying to set the system up and the towers up to be strong, to carry the winds and do all those things, and it drove the foundations bigger. It drove the steel bigger, the 60 KSI versus 30 KSI steel, and then it came back to reality. 30 years later, we had radial ice on all these towers, MPSCS towers up north, and they stood the test of time. They stood while towers around them were falling. It says a lot. So that one most recently, and then the power outage we had, everything's out around the country, but guess what's not out? The MPSCS system.
Yeah, I think we had over 100 generators running at one point.
Yeah.
During the blackout.
Yeah.
It's I don't know. It hits home. So I guess that's what I'd say about that.
Good. Just on that, and I agree, Bob, the ice storm, most recent, piece that, again, was similar to 9/11. It put it in the eyes of the people that we really are the Wizard of Oz. We're behind the scenes. And, I recall the blackout, what it did is Governor Granholm then used the blackout as a decision to say that the MPSCS needs to be in every utilities emergency operations room. So that became then the start of, looking at our utility partners as users in the system. When an incident occurs, we have those communications. The ice storm was that example. What you may not be aware of, but our current estimates on damage to the sites in the MPSCS as part of the ice storm is roughly about $3.5 million, what we've estimated at this point, tracking the costs. And that itself is lost a lot because there was a substantial damage to, the private sector and public sector. Public sector damage to private sector and public sector, components across those counties. In many areas, it was substantial impacts. Utilities alone, I know many of them were bringing in, utility poles from all around the nation because they'd lost entire infrastructure. I think we heard from one utility is they were essentially completely rebuilding their entire infrastructure. So you think of an impact of an ice storm, and even as I've heard from my peers from around the nation, we heard about it in Michigan, but outside of Michigan, there weren't that many people that were hearing about the ice storm and the catastrophic impact it's had on the community, and no doubt still continues to have in the community. We spent the entire time in the State Emergency Operations Center, supporting that event. But it gets back to what you both identified through our conversation, not as direct but spot on, is around relationships. It was the relationships that we had in place with the National Guard, with Department of Natural Resources, where as they were planning efforts to remove trees from roadways and power lines, that we became prioritized because they understood the impact, as their inability to communicate would really hamper capabilities. And
I don't think it could be said enough, Brad, that these towers stood. There literally was towers falling down. There were cell towers, TV towers falling down, and these were standing through it all.
That was my goal.
yeah,
And but it, people need to know that. I
Yeah.
mean, that forethought back then came to fruition 30 years later.
yeah, it's and again, it echoes what we talked about earlier in the podcast, what you guys identified as standards, and then constructed out of that has shown the test of time. Recently I shared is not only has this system continued success through multiple governors, but through multiple impacts from Mother Nature. We've had some towers that took direct impacts from a tornado, and it was still broadcasting. I think it was a F2, F3, don't recall exactly what it was, but it was an F something, but took a direct impact by the tornado, and it was still broadcasting. So it's multifaceted from what you guys identified as standards early on, showed that it can withstand most of what Mother Nature's probably throwing at those sites. But a couple other questions around that is you've retired, Theron, and enjoying the life of retirement. Bob, I know you're not that far from that, probably a handful of years or so. But what advice would you give to a young person looking to follow in a similar path, maybe into public safety, technology, or communications infrastructure?
Go ahead, Bob.
Well, it's an interesting question. My advice, we've hired a couple young folks on our team that are a part of this organization, but yet part of yours now. And I think the greatest advice I've given them is to listen. Listen, be curious, don't be afraid to ask the questions, and don't be afraid to think, ask questions and think you're looking stupid. It's okay. We all start somewhere. So somebody like a Spencer Carter or somebody like those, they're learning the system. They're learning all this kind of stuff. And, it's kind of fun to watch, and it's really fun to mentor in a position, after 31 years to come back, like I said, and see where we're at, and now helping to mentor people, is great. It's phenomenal, actually. It kind of feels very satisfying. So I guess that's my advice, is that, you do have to understand. I mean, there's so much knowledge sitting in your office, sitting in ours, that they can glean, and it just that being curious part, and asking those questions. And I'm watching that growth out of him and a few others that have recently joined the team. So it's really fun to watch.
Okay.
Yeah, and like I said before, success is where preparation and opportunity meets. And so you gotta be ready for that opportunity that's going to show its face. Got to be prepared, and I think you'll be all right. But you just got to do a little work. Got to be ready for it.
Yeah, well, maybe we can tell a whole generation that you have to do a little bit of work. But you're spot on. I learned, work ethic, working with both of you, not just around the office, but also knowing what you guys do outside of the office. And even though you're retired there, and you're very, involved in your community and the efforts that you take on, because you're still passionate. You still have passion for doing what's right. And Bob, you too are involved in your community, from, I know the conversations you and I would have about, your kids through sports and your involvement in their athletic careers through high school, and, how we shared some of the same moments. But it's the passion that you have, not only what you put into the work environment, but also outside of work. It's you're just lighting a different candle as part of that. And that would be the same thing I would say is anyone that's interested in this environment, for one, public safety communications is the most rewarding environment you can participate in. I think we would all agree on that. Is it's, you know, the direct impact of your investment in time in a solution or a technology is benefiting the citizens. It's the one thing we could say over the past 30 years. We know this system saved lives. It protected citizens. It protected public safety. It's provided a solution that didn't exist, and it's provided a means that no one was aware of that they needed at the time until it started solving problems.
You know, Brad, it's that mission that people do need to understand. And I'm glad you said that. And that's that theme runs across every state that I've been in and every big communication system that I've been part of. That is the theme. And the passion you speak about is about caring. And that caring then comes here, and then out comes passion. And that's what you really need to drive and get into this business. But that is that is probably right. That's probably the most satisfying thing at the end of the day, is that you're helping the 10 million citizens of this state. You're helping the thousands and thousands and thousands of first responders in this state. Yeah, that's well said.
I appreciate that, Bob. You know, and as we roll towards the close here, you know, what's the best advice you've ever received?
Listen more than you talk. Short and simple.
Yeah, mine's short and simple too. My grandpa always told me, if you tell the truth, you never have to worry about what you say. And it's really that simple. And a lot of people don't like to hear the truth, but they need to hear the truth.
Yeah, both excellent. You know, I know one that I used to carry in my wallet forever until it's pretty much wore out, so I saved it so I would still have it a few years later. But I think I carried it in the first wallet I ever had at 14. Wallet was bigger than my pocket, but it was a little clipping that my mother cut out for me. I was a runner at the time, and it had this picture of this lone runner, and the road in front of him was nothing but hills. And it said, the race is not always for the swift, but to those who keep on running.
Yep. You know, we can put this on the podcast at some point, but this is probably one of the best things I ever got from Chuck Kuzno towards the end of the project. And I keep this on my desk at home, and I look at it often. And it says, I do not choose to be common. And it goes on. But it's, I think that can be said for this group here at this table. Things don't happen if you're just common. Things happen if you go make them happen. And that's not what's common. You have to cut through the BS and the red tape and go make things happen despite all the naysayers, despite all the negativity, and you make stuff happen. I mean, this is just an incredible system. This is an incredible opportunity. What was created here was incredible. I just hope people can look back and understand the magnitude of what was created and what you have to carry on. It's been a great legacy. The system is a great legacy, and it's a testament to, you know, this group sitting here. So I know without the guy to my left here, we never would have got it done.
Well,
I know it takes a big team, but, you know, somebody's got to go drive through the bullshit and make it happen. That's where it started.
Well said, Bob. And you know, I didn't know where I was going to end up in a career. I mean, just kind of fell into the MSP communications and never knew that we're going to build the state-of-the-art system and so big and have it so successful and be a part of it. And I say a part because we had a great team, and I know we still have a good team. I know when I was getting ready to retire, Kate come and said, hey, can I just talk to you for like a half an hour every week and just ask you questions? I said, absolutely. I was so impressed with that woman for doing it. So there's people that have passion. You gotta do what you love, and I want to take a minute and thank my wife for allowing me all the time that you and I were on the road. We were away from home for a while, but it was exciting. I've had a hell of a career, and thank you.
Bam. Bam. And thank you, both of you. And man, must be some pollen in the air.
Allergies. Fall allergies.
But I'll follow suit on that there. And, I also thank, your wife, Kim, and, your daughters, Terry and Jenny, because, you were on the road. I know it because I saw you casually sometimes in the office. I knew you weren't around. But knowing that, she was supporting your professional growth and what you were having as an impact in the system, definitely, accolades to your spouse, Kim, and what she's
Thank you.
no doubt enjoying in retirement with you, because I know in retirement, it's no different than what you were doing when you were working. There's no moss growing on your feet whatsoever.
No. We took a couple of motorcycle trips, and Kim says, I think it's time to get a convertible. So sold the bike, got a convertible, and, it's a 21. We got over 40,000 miles on it already. So we're seeing the sights. We're seeing a lot of the nation. A lot of fun.
Yeah, well, good. Well, speaking of sights, it is beautiful. I'm so thankful that you allowed us to be up here at your home today. The backdrop that we have here, the eagles, the ospreys that Bob pointed out earlier in the podcast, it's the view that you and Kim get every day. And no doubt it is based on your rewards of a very successful and rewarding career. And fortunately, the gentleman to your right isn't that far from you. So I know you guys still spend plenty of time together, still having discussions around standards and construction and development. So it has never changed nor wavered. So
we were on opposite teams for a while, and we realized we're on the same team. And after Bob built here, he invited Kim and I out for dinner and a boat ride, and we said, this is where we want to be. So we bought the lot, and 7 years later, girls were off in college, and we built 20 years ago and never looked back. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was only supposed to be here for 7 years, and then I was going to move on. Well said, and thanking your wife. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Sally either, as much as we were gone at one point in time with three young kids running around. And, we had to put priorities in place, and having a career and getting this thing done was a big priority. So she put up with a lot as well. But yeah, I mean, it's okay to look back now and say, I tell you, I was supposed to go back home to Joliet in 7 years, and I'm still here.
Well, I just want to say thank you for the invite. It was very cool to reminisce about all this. It was very exciting at the time, and I still look back just going, was it a dream? It was a great career. Great career.
And I'm honored to be here with both of you. I know you personally, I know you professionally, and I know the impact that not only have you had in both aspects of many people's lives. And, the same for Theron's wife, I'd say the same for yours with Sally. The amount of work that both you gentlemen have put in throughout the entire life of the system, there's an investment outside of that's keeping the lights on when you're trying to turn the lights on for public safety down the road. So, we've all learned this in our career, is sometimes it is the investment of time away from family, knowing that the rewards will soon come. Like, clearly you both have amazing rewards that you get to enjoy every day. Before any closing, anything else you gentlemen would like to add for our podcast to our listeners?
No, I'm good, but I'll be right here if you ever have any follow-up questions.
Deal.
I would just say, hey, to all the MPSCS employees out there, we've had each other's back this whole time. We've got your back. Enjoy this system. Take care of the system. Make it the legacy it needs to be as you move it forward. The next 30 years should be awesome, and continue making it great.
Thank you, Bob. And again, thank you, Theron, not only for the time today, but also allowing us to set up in this beautiful location. Thank you both for taking the time out of your day and spending not only with me as we're recording this, but knowing that this is going to live on for, quite some period of time. Today we're talking about the 30 years, but the intent that I really hoped out of this, that at some point in the 40 years, someone's going to look back on this and understand the history and the people of the system. And this has been a goal of mine, for some time. We attempted this for the 25th, and then unfortunately COVID hit. So it paused all that. So be able to bring this back for the 30th it's very important, not only to me, but all the staff that came before us on the system, as well as those that are still today and those that will join tomorrow, to be able to understand why things were done, how they were developed, and the people that made those decisions. So I'm glad we finally were able to get some time scheduled for this. I know I've invited both of you to our 30th celebration. Look forward to having you both there. You'll both have the opportunity to share with the individuals that we also invited there any thoughts you have. So give you some time to think about what you may say. It could be as simple as, hey, work hard, enjoy. But it could also be something as eloquent as what you shared with us today on today's podcast. So I want to say thank you for not only our listeners for listening through all this, but again with Bob and Theron and their families and supporting this time today. That wraps up today's special 30th anniversary edition of Tune In with the MPSCS. We hope you enjoy this look back at history and the evolution of one of the world's most advanced public safety communication systems that's right here in Michigan. One of the most advanced critical infrastructure emergency communication systems that's probably known across our nation, maybe even around the globe. We hope you will all enjoy the show, and we'll see you back real soon. Thank you, and have a great day.